Oh, man, layout's already screwed up. There we go. Oh, add to stage. Anthony, knew we were going to have some issues coming in. So to everybody else, welcome in. We are trying something a little new today. I've got my co-host here, Anthony Testino. You know me from my offensive line grade and film breakdown videos on my YouTube channel. And beginning this year, we've had Anthony on the channel also with his defensive film breakdowns. And today we are going to give a live stream a try for the first time. And we're going to see how it goes and see if it's something you guys are going to be interested in seeing more of in the future. Anthony, how you doing this morning?
Good, buddy. A little tired, but hanging in there.
Yes,
How
sir.
about you?
Uh, Not too bad, not too bad. Definitely got some things that we can, looking forward to talking to with you about today. As everyone knows, we've had a night to sleep on the NFL trade deadline where there were some big moves, but our Miami Dolphins were pretty quiet despite what seemed like a decent amount of smoke. So we're going to give our viewers a chance to, catch wind of this and join in on the live stream and chat. And, first we're going to go fairly quickly through all of the other transactions that happened over, about the last week. And then once everything or everyone has gotten a chance to get comfortable in here and throw some questions in the chat, then we're also going to talk a little more on the one move the Dolphins did make in trading Jalen Phillips, and also about some of the moves that didn't happen for the Dolphins. Let's see.
Love it.
All right, so like I said, I'm gonna kind of go through these, Anthony, and if there's ones that you want me to stop and talk about, we're just gonna kind of go through the list of the trades that did happen, just to give everyone a summary, and then once we get through that, then we'll circle back to the Dolphins a little more. So it kind of, back on November 1st, Baltimore acquired a sixth round pick from the Eagles, and the Eagles got, or I'm sorry, yeah, the Eagles acquired Jair Alexander, and that was a little bit interesting for the Dolphins fans, just because Alexander was a player that a lot of fans were very high on and wanted the Dolphins to get. He went to Baltimore. I know he had some injuries there. I'm not sure how much he really contributed, but when you're looking at basically a sixth and seventh round pick swap for Jair Alexander, it doesn't seem like he did a whole lot for Baltimore either. But maybe a fourth, fifth cornerback that could help the Eagles, as they make a playoff push. And then
Yeah.
next
Okay.
one, oh, go ahead. You want to say on that one?
No, no, I was just gonna say real quick, same thing kind of that you thought, just very interesting. Like the Baltimore match, right, was there from the beginning because Lamar, is a college teammate, advocated for it. And it seemed like, okay, there's another typical Ravens move. But then here we are now entering week 10, and it seems like Howie, is like, how he's doing Howie things, right? But again, like, how much is he going to play? It's just a really weird situation. This guy, he may never play a snap, or does he start playing in week 14 and all of a sudden he's like kind of back in the swing of things by the end of the year, and he's just another piece, that helps the Eagles reach the Super Bowl again, in the playoffs, right? So it's like, yeah, just really weird. I don't know. I guess I don't blame him for trying to do it, considering it's just a pick swap, but yeah, I don't know, just odd. Well, something to pay attention to though.
Yep. And then the next one was on November 3rd. So that was going to be Monday. And that was Draymond Jones going to the Ravens from the Titans in exchange for a fifth round pick that, could rise to a fourth round pick. It's a conditional pick. Again, kind of a lower end move, but, Baltimore seems to, I mean, they obviously had a good defense against us on Thursday night. Draymond Jones is a player that I remember, liking a decent amount. So I kind of like that for the Ravens. Another player just to add some more tools to that toolbox on the defense they have.
Yeah, the only thing that I was kind of head scratching to me, and it's probably because I'm not super familiar with, the cap and who's a free agent, who's not quite yet. But they had just traded away Odafe Owe, the other, like their own edge rusher, like a week or 2 weeks ago. So to bring one back in because you need help, like I said, I kind of looked at it and said, okay, curious, but we'll see.
Absolutely. All right. And then one that I, kind of thought you might have a little interest in, because on your defensive video this week, you had talked about, the one, well, I know that you're not a big fan of Darrell Dodson. A lot of Dolphins fans are not. But you talked about on your video this week about, wanting to acquire a true middle linebacker, and the Dallas Cowboys traded for Logan Wilson, gave up, a 7th-round pick to get him. I know that you had mentioned Demetrius Knight and the way that he has played for the Bengals so far this year. So when you look at getting somebody like Logan Wilson for a 7th-round pick, we weren't expecting the Dolphins to make massive moves at the trade deadline. But is this one that you kind of would like the Dolphins to kick the tires on? Is this the type of middle linebacker you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I mentioned it in the video that, they need somebody that can truly quarterback the defense. That's like the leader. I just feel like Miami hasn't had like an actual identity to who they are defensively in a long time. They've had some good defenses as far as like statistics where they finish, but I just feel like it was kind of, it's like, oh, well, who do you think of when you talk Dolphins defense, and it's usually a collection of people, and that's fine. But I grew up on the Zach Thomas days, and I know, and don't get me wrong, he had plenty of help around him. That defense was loaded, but that was Zach Thomas's defense, and that was the leader, and they went as he went, and he set the tone every Sunday. And again, I just don't think they've had that. I think Jordan Brooks is kind of from, in the same mold, but I think Jordan would rather be, the will and not the green dot and not the leader, where he can be a little more quiet and he can just kind of do his thing. So again, yeah, I think Miami should, be in full search mode for finding I'll just use Fred Warner as an example, but somebody, that is cut from the same cloth. So Logan Wilson kind of is that, I guess. I think he signed a contract, though, maybe a year or two ago, where I'm wondering if Cincinnati's kind of in the same mode, right, as like, let's shed cap and prepare because, we're not going anywhere. I mean, they're fighting, they made the Flacco move, but at the same time, like you had mentioned earlier, the Demetrius Knight selection and the fact that he's played early and often maybe just made, Wilson expendable. So.
Yeah, he did sign a contract. Looks like he is under contract through 2027. But there's also an out for the Cowboys with this move as well. Looking at Spotrac right now, or Spot Track, however you want to pronounce it, shows a potential out in 2026 where they can shed says option. Basically, you can drop them with 0 dead cap. So, low risk move for the Cowboys in that sense. Moving along, next one was the Las Vegas Raiders traded Jacoby Myers to the Jacksonville Jaguars. In exchange, the Raiders received a 4th and a 6th-round pick. And next one was the Sauce Gardner one. We're going to skip over that one for now because we're going to come back and talk about the Jets at the end of these other transactions. Rashid Shaheed went from the Saints to the Seahawks.
I think that's a good get.
For a 4th and 5th-round pick. Not a player I'm familiar with. So, what you said, a good get?
Yeah, speedster, man. He can absolutely fly, take the top off the defense. And I think we saw last year that Cooper Kupp is just not the same. JSN has really taken the next step and just become an elite dominating receiver. Like he's kind of almost like in that Puka mold, right? Where they're like, if they're throwing the ball, it's good chance he's the one that's being targeted, and everyone knows it, and they still can't stop him, So he's having a really, really good just breakout year, even though he was still good last year. But, Rashid is a guy that's not going to, you're not going to force feed him 8 targets or feel the need to do that. He's a guy that, if you get him 4 or 5 targets, maybe an end around, a screen, he can help you in the return game if really, if it was really necessary. But I just think he's a good fit because JSN can kind of work underneath and run all routes, and Shaheed can kind of be the guy that catches on the run, takes the top off the defense, and really opens up, the middle of the field and opportunities for other guys.
Yeah, it looks like he is on a expiring contract after this year. He had signed a 1-year, $5.2 million contract with the Saints. So the Seahawks will have to make a decision on him after this year, but giving up a 4th and a 5th round pick, that makes it feel like, they're probably looking to make this more than just a half season rental.
Yeah, and what I was going to touch on there is like we have to remember too, this past offseason, they did trade DK Metcalf, so they obviously had a vision, I think, for what they want their offense and what the skill positions to look like, from a, hey, this guy can do this guy can do that, and mesh the pieces together. So I think this might be a little bit more of a more permanent move than just a rental and, hey, we're having a good year, let's try to go get it.
Yep. And then, so next one we have is another pick swap. So it's the Browns sending Joe Tryon to the Bears. The Browns acquired a 6th round pick from the Bears, and then they gave up Joe Tryon and a 7th round pick. Again, another player that I'm not real familiar with. He's 26 years old, decently built player from what I remember. But another expiring contract here, has some void years on the end that the Browns are going to eat in terms of that. But this one definitely feels like it could just be a half season trial, see if it's something the Bears want to keep or not, and the Browns just offloading a player that they had already made a decision on.
Yeah, so I remember him a little bit from Tampa when they drafted him. I think, and again, I'm kind of the same with you. Not a guy that's made a ton of noise. Still young enough where I think, like somebody's taking a shot on him. I had read, I think, that the Bears were on somebody else, maybe Jermaine Johnson from the Jets, but the asking price was too high. So then that's where they had pivoted to. So I don't know. The Bears are kind of in that, 1 week they look like they could do something and the next week they don't. So I don't know. I guess for the price, it can't hurt. But again, I don't think there's all that much to see there.
Yep. And I see we have a couple of viewers in here. Just a reminder that we're just going through the non-Dolphins moves right now. We're going to touch on the Jets ones all together before we get to the Dolphins ones. But if you guys have questions or comments, put them in the chat here, and we're going to try to respond to everything that we can as part of this live stream as well. So the next move and the last one before we get to the Jets moves is going to be the Los Angeles Chargers acquiring Trevor Penning from the New Orleans Saints, and that was at the cost of a 6th round pick. And like this move for the Chargers, they obviously had the injuries at both tackles, and were definitely suffering there. Penning was a 1st round pick, number 19 overall back in 2022. I think he had some injury issues and just never really caught on with the Saints. But I remember him being a fairly coveted prospect when he came out. Not like he was a super high reach or anything like that. So opportunity for the Chargers to maybe, get kind of a revival of a career with Trevor Penning, and same idea with Penning. He is on a expiring contract as well. That he did not, his 5th-year option was not picked up. So he's got a chance here for the second half of the season to put some good tape out there and, either get an invite back to the Chargers, right? Or, show other teams that he is capable of being the player that, a lot of teams thought that he was when he was drafted in the 1st round.
Yeah, big opportunity, obviously. Like you said, as much as it seems like Dolphins and Chargers Twitter are at each other's throats weekly when it comes to Tua and Herbert, I actually, partially do feel bad for the Chargers because it seems like they have the kind of same injury luck that we do, where it's just year in, year out. It's, you get to the point where you just throw your arms up and say, like, what do we have to do, to stay healthy and get like a fair crack at this thing, yeah, Rashawn Slater going down is brutal, and then you get the alt scare like a month ago, but then he's back, and then it happens again, and it's just brutal. But I think the same way you do, the Penning move is exactly that. He gets an opportunity, and the Chargers maybe shore up one of those spots, and he's got a chance to make himself some money because obviously, offensive linemen around the league, it's a scarce position to find good, dependable, bodies, and especially at the tackle position.
Definitely. So as we get into the Jets part of it, I mean, the Jets are obviously a divisional team, a rival of the Dolphins, and they were very active at this trade deadline. And it really goes back to, they started back on October 29th. They traded a 7th-round pick and Michael Carter to the Philadelphia Eagles. And in exchange, they got a 6th-round pick and John Mechie. And then they followed it up with the big Sauce Gardner trade. So they sent Sauce Gardner to the Colts, and in exchange, they received a 1st-round pick in 2026, a 1st-round pick in 2027, and A.D. Mitchell, right? A 1st-round pick in 2024, if I remember correctly. And then
I think he might have been a second, but
okay, yeah, still
good prospect. I like him a lot.
Yeah, and then there was also the Quinnen Williams trade where they acquired another 2027 1st-round pick, which is going to be, it says the highest Dallas pick. So I guess the Cowboys have multiple, and it's going to be whatever's higher. 2026 2nd-round pick, and then defensive tackle Mozzie Smith. And Mozzie Smith was a 1st-round pick in 2023, number 26 overall. And then they kind of cleaned it up with acquiring Jasir Taylor from the Chargers in exchange for a 7th-round pick. So my thoughts on what the Jets did was that, obviously they are they're tanking, right? You don't trade away Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner if you still think there's any chance of being able to compete this year. But I really like the way that they did it. They obviously got good value in terms of draft picks for them. But when you look at some of the players that they acquired, like John Mechie, A.D. Mitchell, and Mozzie Smith, those were all highly regarded prospects coming out of college. And they just, their careers have not panned out in the NFL so far. And they're probably not going to pan out with the Jets either. But even if you get one of those guys to develop into an average or above average starter, like that's a home run to get those type of players thrown in with those trades as well. So I don't expect the Jets to rebuild correctly. They never have. But the way that they are setting up, if they actually do things the right way, they are set up to do whatever they want over the next couple of years. We know that, the key to all of these rebuilds is getting the quarterback right. And when you have the treasure chest of picks that the Jets now have, whether it is a 2026 quarterback or a 2027 quarterback, they can almost literally do whatever they want in terms of moving up and finding who they want to build around.
Yeah, fully agree. If you spent some time on Twitter yesterday, you saw that a lot of people were, upset with the lack of moves that the Dolphins made, and had kind of basically shown jealousy towards what the Jets were doing, right? But I think, the Dolphins are in a different situation for one. And two, I don't really think they have the all pros that are available. And I don't think they have to go scorched earth in order to rebuild and do this the right way. They also currently, are in limbo when it comes to who their GM is going to be, who their head coach is going to be and how, they're going to handle the cap going forward. So, yeah, just to veer off of that just for a split second, it would have been nice to get rid of some of the other contracts. But you can only do what other teams are willing to do, when working with you, right? So I'm with you though. The Jets, I thought they did a good job. But I even said this on Twitter as well. Like, until the Jets do something right, I kind of just shrug my head, like my shoulders, and say, like, okay, like, great, like, let's see what you do with them all, because we've been there, right? Traded away Tunsil, and it kept, it was the gift that kept on giving. Trade back, turn it into more. Trade back, turn it into more. And if you don't pick the right players, you can have all the first round picks and second round picks you want. And that organization, I will say, it seems like they've had actually pretty good success when it comes to drafting. It's just that quarterback spot seems like it's been, underdeveloped, or they don't have the right people in place there. So, if they are going to go after, I mean, and they are, it just depends, like you said, which year it's going to be. But if they don't have the right guy in place to set that quarterback up and develop him, it's all going to be for naught again. And, again, it's funny, but the Jets make me actually feel good about being a Dolphins fan, regardless of how bad we have been.
Yep.
Just being honest.
No, I agree with that completely. All right, so that's going to wrap up the non-Dolphins trades that were made. Like I said, we're gonna field any questions that we can towards the end of this here. But before that, wanted to talk about some of the stuff the Dolphins did do and did not do. So the one trade the Dolphins did make was to trade edge player Jalen Phillips to the Philadelphia Eagles, and that was in exchange for a third-round pick. And in addition to the trade, the Dolphins also ate a bunch of that contract. So the Philadelphia Eagles are only going to be on the hook for $1.5 million of Jalen Phillips' contract. So from the Eagles' perspective, I think the move made a lot of sense for the Eagles, in the sense that it's a third round pick for a very good player. Right? Maybe not, you're not talking about a Micah Parsons, a Myles Garrett, anything of that level, but still a very good player. And when you get more talent around him, I think he's going to shine even more. So I think, I could see him going to Philly and having a very strong second half of the season. But then the result of that is that he's going to demand a big contract when he makes the free agency, assuming that he stays healthy, which is a big question for Jalen Phillips. And then, even if he goes somewhere else, let's say he comes in, he has a monster second half of the season, outprices himself from the Eagles, signs a big contract somewhere else. If he stays healthy next year as well, then the Eagles are going to recoup a comp pick as part of that Jalen Phillips deal. And they could essentially, almost get a half season rental for free if everything goes in the right direction. So I really like it from their perspective. And for the Dolphins' perspective, I like the trade as well. Maybe not quite as much as I do for the Eagles, but at the same time, we know that he is an injury risk. His past two seasons have both ended on injured reserve. There's no guarantee that that doesn't happen again. So, you could have kept him around, right? We're getting a guest appearance today. There we
go. He's up. He's here.
So, we could have kept him around. We could have hoped that he signed a big contract, played the comp pick game, and hoped that we ended up with a third or a fourth round pick. But, we've had a couple of contracts recently that, I feel like the Dolphins should be shy about doing something like that, whether it's the Tua contract where we are, signing an injured player to a big contract, hoping for him to stay healthy, and it, just doesn't happen, or whether it's the Christian Wilkins idea where we end up letting him walk and basically assuming that we're going to get a comp pick, and then he gets injured and we get nothing at all for it. So, I do like the move for the Dolphins. I know that a lot of fans would have preferred to see Bradley Chubb, and we'll talk a little bit more about the trades that didn't happen. But I don't think there was nearly as much of a market for Bradley Chubb. So I think the Dolphins did a good job in terms of trading Jalen Phillips, getting a day 2 pick. And, in addition to the compensation that you get for Jalen Phillips directly, you are now opening up snaps for, a guy like Chop Robinson, who's going to play more now, going to play a little more in those roles that we've seen Jalen Phillips in, and he's going to have an opportunity to show how big of a piece of the puzzle he can be as we move forward. So, what are your thoughts on the Jalen Phillips thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think you pretty much hit the nail, on the, hit the nail on the head. Agree wholeheartedly with literally everything. I think the biggest thing I was excited for was the fact that Chop's going to play, because I've been saying that for, a month now, is if you want these guys to develop and you're going to force and go through the growing pains with Jonah, and you're going to go through the growing pains with Kenneth Grant and Phillips, and the adjustments you make and the snap count changes are minor for the most part, right? Then why is Chop getting like 23% of the snap counts? I understand you have vets and you're trying to win, but again, you saw what he did in the second half of last year. You spent a first round pick on this guy, and he's electric. Like when he gets it going, right? And he's got the highest ceiling out of probably any of them. You could argue Phillips. I mean, I'm a big fan of Jalen Phillips, so from that perspective, I was bummed to see him go. But I understand it, and for exactly all the same reasons that you had said. I think Philly's really smart, and I think Howie does a great job of taking these low risk, high reward kind of chances. Philly had 3 third-round picks already, so getting rid of one, does nothing for them, and then it doesn't hurt them at all. And then, like you talked about, they have the chance to recoup it, with a comp pick. So, yeah, from Philly's perspective, great trade. From Miami, I totally get it. I really wish, um, things were a little bit more stable, because I would have liked to have seen Jalen find a way back. Just because when you watch the tape, he was by far the most consistent one this year. I really was hoping to have a defense that was Jalen and Chop getting the most of the edge snaps. I thought that they would do a good job of working off of each other, and and Chubb would be the one to go, but unfortunately that's not how things turned out.
Yeah, so as we talk about Chubb, let's kind of transition to that one, because that was a player that a lot of fans wanted to see go. Uh, but I think that when you look at it, I'm trying to find, looking for stuff live here. So Cam Jordan, another guy on Twitter, he had tweeted out that if Chubb was traded before June 1st, 2026, that Miami's cap hit would be 23.9 million in 2026 still. So, even if the other team takes on the entire contract, it didn't make sense to trade Chubb for cap purposes. Like you weren't really going to receive, you weren't going to get any relief from that. And then from Chubb's contract, on his own, really wasn't that appealing for the acquiring team either. Like he had a big cap number coming into this year.
Yeah.
And he restructured it down to basically a minimum base salary that he could earn back in incentives. And to me, that felt like a kind of deal where they were like, look, if we don't do something with your contract, then we're cutting you. And, he took the opportunity to have the option to earn it back through incentives that he might not have gotten on the open market, but they didn't touch the future years of his deal. So the next 2 years for the Dolphins, he still has a $31 million cap hit each of the next 2 years. And those include base salaries of 19.45 million and 18.48 million. So, while Jalen Phillips is an expiring contract, the Eagles don't have any, future cost of business really in a negative manner with Jalen Phillips. For anybody that was trading for an older, and I don't want to say less talented, because Bradley Chubb was a first round pick, good player in his own right. But I think if you look at those two players, Chubb was the lesser of the players today. But you're looking at a guy that's getting ready to turn 30, still has 2 years of, pretty significant contract there. So I don't know that he was all that appealing for other teams. I guess that my hope at this point, and kind of put this out there on Twitter as well, would be that as you get into next year, seems like the team really likes Bradley Chubb as a leader, very good locker room guy. I kind of hope that next year we can get something similar, right? He's still not playing up to a $30 million cap hit type player right now. So maybe next year you kind of have the same conversation like, hey, we want to keep you around Bradley Chubb. We want you to be part of this rebuild, but we're not going to do it at, a $20 million base salary. We got to convert some of this into incentives. And, Bradley Chubb may not be thrilled about that, but at the same time, like he really hasn't done a whole lot to go out into the open market and get a 12 $15 million deal out there as well. So I wouldn't have hated seeing Bradley Chubb move, but I also don't mind seeing him stick around. I don't know what they were asking for him. If you were going to tell me that we were just going to get a 7th round pick and we were going to dump Bradley Chubb, I'd have probably said that I'm okay just keeping him around. What are your thoughts on the Bradley Chubb thing?
Yeah, I think, kind of what I had mentioned before, he was the one that I felt that I was probably the most okay with letting go. I also tweeted like early this morning / last night, what it looks like with Bradley Chubb's contract and Tyreek's contract together, and what some of the options are as far as moving on for them next year, and how much cap space it's going to create, and basically your option, of do we just cut them outright, or do we make them post June 1st cuts? But then there's the, factor of you can't touch that money until free agency's been around for, 2-3 months already. Like, so yeah, I would have preferred Jalen stay, but at the same time, like I had mentioned before, the interest can only be, you can only work with who's interested. And it sounded like other teams had Jermaine Johnson on their radar, and then when they pivoted, they went elsewhere. They went with more youth. So it kind of is what it is. And again, Bradley's aside from the injuries, Bradley's been a good Dolphin. He says all the right things, he does all the right things. He's kind of part of this leader group, right? That the team in the locker room can kind of depend on for certain things. And, at this point, he's got Chop under his wing, and he's not a bad pro to keep. And like you said, the return was probably going to be very minimal. It's not the end of the world that we kept him around.
Yeah, and so there was also a tweet from James Palmer, and he said, kind of to your point there, it's worth noting that if your team didn't make a move, it's not because they weren't aggressive enough or they weren't actively working to get a deal done to fill a need. It takes two sides to agree to make a trade, and teams often have firm compensation that they won't go past. The same people that complain about their team not making a move are the same ones that complain that their team overpaid. And that's kind of opposite of what we have with the Dolphins, but I do think it's still relevant in the sense that just because some of these moves weren't made doesn't necessarily mean the Dolphins weren't having those conversations. You have to really settle on what you would have accepted for it, right? Like I said, I wouldn't have traded Bradley Chubb for a 7th round pick, right? But if there was a team out there that was offering a 4th or a 5th, then that's a different conversation that I personally would have had. So it's not to say that the Dolphins didn't have these players out there and they weren't shopping them. They just it may have set some sort of guidelines as to what they would accept, and that's where it was. And that kind of takes us to our next player, which was Jalen Waddle. And I don't know if there was ever a lot of noise from the Dolphin side in terms of trading Waddle. I think it was a lot of other fan bases that were looking in on the Dolphins, thinking they were doing the New York Jets thing and having a complete fire sale. I think that a bit much was made of the fact that the Dolphins were even listening to it. But, I talked about this on Scouting the Fins last night, that, if you look at it from the Dolphin sense, if you remember back to when they traded Laramie Tunsil, Laramie was not a player that they were looking to trade. It was the Texans came in and, there was a report or, quote, whatever, that Tunsil walks into the coach's office, sees what was given up on the board, and he's like, yeah, I'd have traded me too. So I think it was one of those deals that, the Dolphins weren't necessarily shopping Jalen Waddle, but if a team is going to come in and, give an exorbitant amount to get him, then you should at least listen to that. And that should be for any player, right? And I would even I would say that right now, uh, I feel like Patrick Paul is the most untouchable player on the roster. But if somebody's going to call and they're going to be like, "Hey, we're going to give up 3 first-round picks for Patrick Paul," then I'd be like, "Well, maybe we need to look at this a little bit, right? Not that you're actively looking to shop these type of players, but the phones should always be open." So, what are your thoughts on either what did or did not happen with the shopping of Jalen Waddle?
Yeah, I think you're doing a really good job of stealing things I want to say. um, but yeah, I agree. Waddle is one of the guys that I think should be here and should be part of this next group of Dolphins that are going to be the guys that try to turn this franchise around. Again, Jalen is another guy that's never been an issue, stayed quiet, did played his role when Tyreek was in the spotlight, and now has an opportunity again to continue to develop, which I think was halted maybe a little bit or at least slowed. And he's shining, and I think he's really proving that he's worth that contract. And in another year's time, he'll fall farther down the list, and it'll look like a steal for what you get from a guy like that. I also think he's the kind of player that is um, like scheme transcendent, where he, if you want him to be a guy that runs the inside breaking routes, right, he's been doing that. If you want him to run vertical, he's doing that. If you want him to run real routes, he can do that as well. So regardless if it's Mike McDaniel or the next guy, I think Jalen Waddle can fit into your offense, and I feel the same way about Devon Achane too. So I do think hanging on to those guys is a good thing. With the Jets, again, they brought in a great haul, but they traded away two all pro players. Like those are big shoes and difficult shoes to fill. When you have a Jalen Waddle, kind of player, and a Devon Achane, like they don't grow on trees. They're hard to find. They're hard to hit on, and you need to do a good job of drafting and get lucky to replace them. So, like you said, if you're not going to be blown away with big time compensation, then no thank you. But any GM, you're not doing your job if you don't pick up the phone and at least listen, right?
Absolutely. And so, on the topic of listening, we got a couple more players here to get through for the Dolphins, just to get your opinions on, Anthony. Uh, Again, we have a few viewers in here watching. We do have one question in the chat that we are going to get to as we get through here. Definitely invite anybody else to add some more questions in there so we can keep this conversation going. The next one I wanted to kind of talk about was Minkah Fitzpatrick. Not a whole lot of smoke on that one, but seemed like a deal that maybe teams came calling and Minka was like, "Yeah, I'm kind of interested." What was not the same as what was it, 2019, when he was very vocal and kind of pushed his way out. But it, and I get it from Minka's perspective. You get traded from the Steelers to the Dolphins, and you're back to what it was. I don't want to say what it was like when you were here before, because it's not the same as 2019. The Dolphins are not trying to tank in 2025 the way that they were in 2019, even though the records may be similar. But I get it from a vet like Minka that I get him saying that, look, if somebody wants to come get me, I'm open to going and playing somewhere else that's got a better chance. But what are your thoughts on Minka and the potential of the conversations around him?
Yeah, he's one that I was worried about just because of the history, right? I actually thought the likelihood of him getting traded was more so that he would be than not. But I will say, like I was willing to go to war for HN and Waddle, but I'm also a very big Minka fan, so I put on my Dolphins hat a little bit for that, for that situation with him. So I was quietly hoping they didn't, even though I would completely understand and do think it even makes sense that they could have traded him. Um, I saw that Cowboys rumored to be, and I know that I think Jerry Jones was on Sirius XM and had said that that they had just made a trade. and people were, like people were trying to connect the dots and thought that it was Minka, and it was kind of like, here we go. But for me, I think Minka's really developed and matured as a leader, and I think he's kind of touched on some of that in some of his pressers. Um, Considering how young the Dolphins are going to be going forward, you need a couple of those guys, to be the leaders and show these guys the way, right? So, Minka's maybe a little more of the quiet type, but if you have kind of paid attention to what guys have said about him, they say he's a leader by example. So for me, again, the Dolphins fan in me wanted to keep him, but I think you can make a strong case to keep him, from a rebuild perspective too. And I believe his contract, and realistically, it's kind of the same with a couple of guys where, if they really want to move on and say the offseason goes by and he's not happy, just because you didn't get it done now doesn't mean that you can't get it done in March when the new league year comes up. I think his contract is, malleable as far as like whether you can trade it or not and how much dead money you'll take on and the savings and all that stuff. I'm happy, but again, we'll have to see, what happens going forward, just because there's so much uncertainty with who's going to be calling the shots and, what they think that the 2026 Dolphins should look like.
Absolutely. And then another one of your guys, Rasul Douglas, was another one that, his name was kind of tossed around. I'm not sure if there was really ever any interest in him. But would he have been a player that you'd have taken a pick for if somebody was looking for a short-term answer, a contending team trying to get a solid player for the second half of the season? Would you have listened to conversations for him?
Yeah. I honestly, if I was the GM, of another team, I would have made a move for Rasul, seeing how well he's played and the fact that if you are contending and need secondary help and corner help, um, he's playing lights out football. He does it all. He helps in the run game. You and I looked at him in preseason and we're happy and excited, and he's been every bit, of what we wanted him to be and thought that he might be. He's a guy that's got playoff games under his belt, and I think he signed for roughly 3 million, and it's a 1-year deal. So it's not, I highly doubt he'll be in Miami next year unless he likes it more than I think he does, considering the situation and the losses. But yeah, I was really, really surprised that he didn't end up going somewhere.
And then I don't know if you heard of any other ones. The last one that I kind of saw something on, and I have no idea how legitimate it was that there was some teams that had called about Jalen Wright, and that would be one that, based on what the Dolphins have done with him so far this year. I mean, I know they gave up a third-round pick last year to move up to get him, but he seems so buried on the depth chart. I mean, he didn't even make it to the active roster with two running backs on Thursday night. So I mean, and maybe that's a case of wanting to let whoever is next get a chance to evaluate Jalen Wright. But that feels like one that if they are looking to hang on to Mike McDaniel, I'm not sure why you wouldn't, basically take anything available for Jalen Wright. So, would you have traded Jalen Wright for a day 3 pick, a late day 3 pick? And was there anybody else that you had seen rumors on that you want to discuss before we move on to our questions?
It's difficult, but he's somebody that, I mean, for the same reasons, I thought maybe somebody would come, be interested and kind of do that whole, hey, we'll give you a 6th, and get this guy off your roster if you're not going to use him. Seems like Ali has jumped him. And, if, again, in my world, I picture Ollie Gordon being a bell cow with Devon Achane being the one that spells him. And again, I mean, Jalen Wright, 3rd round pick, right? Or he was fourth round? Was he fourth? No, he was third round pick. They
Fourth.
gave up. He was
He,
fourth.
he was
They
a
gave
fourth
up the
round pick. They
future
gave up a
third
third to
for
move
him,
up.
right?
Yep.
Okay. But I had done I had done a little bit of digging and saw that there were teams that liked him and interested, and I wouldn't have been surprised, at all if he was traded. But the thing is, I guess, it's kind of running back's one of those positions where it's like if you have cheap labor and they're talented and they're trying to now squeeze some special teams play out of him, it's kind of like, maybe we'll just hang on to him. But I think if somebody would have thrown you a fifth, I would have ran and turned that in. So no issues there with hanging on to him. But
Yeah, gotcha. So we are going to move on to the question. The only one question in the chat so far. If you guys got any more, the guys that are watching now, throw them in there, and we'll get to all the questions. And this first question, so from the List podcast, and those are some great guys. Been on with them a couple of times. Definitely recommend checking them out. And the question was directed at me for Coach Eric. Any offensive line prospects you really like this year so far? So even though it's directed at me, Anthony, I'm going to give you a chance here. Have you looked at any college offensive linemen? Is there anybody that's really caught your eye yet?
No, from a like focal point of really like studying the tape, just checking out the mock drafts. I've seen the names at the top, and I was actually, this kind of brought up something in my head where I'm at the point where I think the ship has sailed with Austin Jackson for me.
Mm-hmm.
I do think he's another one that has a contract that if it's a post June 1st cut, it's feasible. Would have to double check that. It looks like you're going to work on that now, so I appreciate that. But just a guy that it's a lot of money that's seems to be consistently sitting on the bench, or on the training table, and again, Miami needs guys that are going to play. And I wanted to ask you actually if you've taken a look or just based on even just a further look away. Spencer Fennell is one that's up there. Was it Maliaga or Maliaga? I haven't figured out how to pronounce that yet.
I think is what it
Francis.
is.
Yeah, Francis. I know it's his brother. I think that got drafted by the Jets and plays middle linebacker, right? Yeah,
Yep.
right. So, yeah, I would say if Miami's going to be in that top 5, top 6 range, if they can play right tackle, sign me up. But again, I will defer to you when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah, so I haven't gotten into a bunch of college stuff yet, but I do talk to some guys in the draft professors groups. I've podcasted with them a couple times, and they had asked me to come on to talk offensive line. So I did dive into the offensive line a little bit. In terms of Austin Jackson, I don't know why the little button's not working here, so I can't really see the post June 1st number.
Let's see if I can pull it up.
But it looks like you would at least get some cap savings, even with a regular cut, right? His cap hit for 2026 is 15.77, and then the dead cap that it shows there would be 13.76. So you'd be saving, $2 million off the bat just by cutting him as a non-post June 1st cut. So probably would obviously be more than that to be able to do it that way. Some of the guys that you mentioned there, Francis Maligoa, I like him, but I think that I don't know how teams are going to view him because he doesn't look like your prototype NFL tackle. I could see teams that want to pigeonhole him more as a guard and move him to the inside. I think that's going to be a big part of it. I think that, and we'll see what his measurements come in at, but he looks kind of as a shortish type player. When we talk about height and arm length, stuff like that, I think he can still succeed as a tackle. But there's always risk there when you take somebody that feels like they are athletically limited as a tackle and put them there in the NFL. And that's why I can kind of see teams pigeonholing him as a guard. One of the guys the draft professors have working with them now is Jerry Ostrowski, that was a former Bills offensive lineman, and he had made the comparison of Deion Dawkins from Maligoa. And I kind of like that because, he doesn't, when you watch Deion Dawkins play, like you wouldn't take anything from his film and be like, hey, this is what you want a prototype tackle to do. His technique works great for him. Obviously, been a very successful tackle, but not something that you necessarily want to replicate. And then you mentioned Fano also from Utah. That's a guy that I think that I don't think I'm as high on him as some other people. Definitely still like him. I think he's got some room to work in pass pro. I think he turns into too much of a waist bender at times, but very good in the run game. Once he gets a hold of you, right, he's going to do a good job controlling you. So those are two guys that I like, but I'm not sure, thinking about draft positions, and we're expecting the Dolphins to have a top 10 pick here in the 2026 draft. So your second round pick, right, is going to be 40-ish. And I'm not sure that Maligoa or Fano are in that range. Just to throw a couple of names out there of guys that, are not top 10 picks, because I don't really see the Dolphins spending a top 10 pick on a right tackle. Although I do agree with you that, it's kind of time to look past Austin Jackson. Very good player in this scheme when he's on the field, but the on the field part has not happened nearly enough. And, they've said that Mike McDaniel is safe through the end of the year. We'll see if that happens, if they keep losing, but we have no idea what the scheme in the future looks like. And this wide zone scheme is very much a, uh, you know, picture perfect fit for Austin Jackson. If we go to a different scheme, right, then you could, some of the issues that he's had in the past in terms of pass protection and stuff like that could resurface. So a couple names that I want to throw out there for everybody that I have been looking at right tackle that I like, but not necessarily top of the draft guys. Brian Parker from Duke. A guy that plays with good leverage, has NFL size, like unlike Maligoa, in my opinion. Not a super great athlete, but he's got a nasty streak to him. Does a good job with his hands. I don't think he's going to be the guy that you can put out there and have him on an island, but you have that on the opposite side with Patrick Paul. So, you don't have to have that on both sides of the line. So Brian Parker is somebody that I kind of like at this point. And, going back to Jerry Ostrowski, he compared him to Spencer Brown, the other tackle for the Bills. So, when you're looking at different types of players, like those are some guys that you can compare them to there. And then the other player that I kind of like a little bit down in the draft, another right tackle, PJ Williams, playing for SMU. And this is another guy that looks a little undersized. He's a solid but not a great mover. I think that he plays with very good anticipation. Because of his size, sometimes he has to kind of overcommit, and that can get him into trouble at times. But I think that he does, that doesn't happen too often. He's got a very good feel for how much he needs to commit. Another guy that might consider moving him inside. And my final note on Williams is that you could do a lot worse than PJ Williams as a rookie right tackle, and that he reminds me of a poor man's version of Francis Maligoa. So those are just some names to toss out there as far as the offensive line stuff goes. And then we're going to move to another question, right? We got Adam Lynch here. What do you guys think about Tua? I think he's a good QB. I wouldn't be so quick to replace him. Putting together the next comment with that as well. So, Tua is always a very polarizing figure, and we're not going to spend a ton of time on Tua here. But
are you sure?
I'm going to put an end to it. We're not going to spend the whole podcast on it, right? So let's get your quick thoughts on Tua, Anthony.
I'm a big Tua fan. I believe that you can win and win big with Tua. I acknowledge it hasn't been as good this year as recently. I understand we're probably at the point of fatigue, but again, I've been around and watched since '95. I really believe it's a Miami Dolphins issue, and I believe the team, with the way they've done things, has let him down more than he has let the team down. And the last thing I'll say is for the rebuttals of they went and got Tyreek Hill. They have, I don't care if they have Calvin Johnson and Randy Moss. You have to build it correctly. Like, certain guys will not succeed with just star players around them. That's why dream teams lose, because they don't fit properly together. I believe that if Tua had a run game, power run game, 22 personnel, 12 personnel, 2 tight ends on the field, running back, fullback, and you pounded the rock and ran it 35 times, and Tua threw it 25 times instead of asking him to throw it 40 times. And I believe that's how you get it done with Tua. But that's just a personal opinion. And I know that there are some that will just say, that's wrong and he sucks and that's all there is to it. But to each their own.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to get the material they want from either of us when it comes to Tua, because there are definitely the people that say that he sucks no matter what, and there are the people that will defend him to the end of the earth. Also, throwing Mario Gonzalez's question up here, statement. I think we really need to clarify whether Tua is on the table for next year. Is he staying or not? And for me, I think anything's on the table, right? I think we've kind of reached the end of the rope in terms of him being a long-term solution for the Dolphins. I don't feel like he will ever get a fair shake from a large portion of the fan base. I think that even if he were to come back and play in his 2023 form, that there would still be that part of the fan base is like, well, let's wait and see when he gets injured, right? Let's wait and see when he falls apart again.
Just
Where
waiting
for
for
Tua, he could go somewhere else, and he can be that savior for them, right? And I don't know whether that happens or not. I do have concerns that at this point in his career, that maybe the injuries, maybe the doubt all around him has kind of uh, added up, right? Mike McDaniel talked about having to come in and give him that confidence when he came in, and that worked for a couple of years there. But now it feels like we're back to a player that is not playing very confident, right? We saw him get that intentional grounding against the Ravens, where the pressure was not nearly close enough to take an intentional grounding on there. Just kind of some stuff like that, and it's tough to blame him, right? But can he go somewhere else and have another coach build him up, and that team not be waiting for it to fall apart? So, I don't, everything is on the table. Like I said, I could see a scenario where Mike McDaniel sticks around for another year. They keep Tua for another year, and it's kind of a bridge quarterback to see what happens. But I could also see a scenario where they decide, hey, we know this is not going to work. It is not going to be healthy to have this quarterback hanging around with this massive salary that we know is not going to be the future. And we decide to, as Kyle Krabs says, take the bad medicine now and get rid of him and take that record-setting dead cap hit. So last question that we have in the chat right now, unless anybody else wants to throw one in there, is another one from Mario, and he says, "Is there any chance they let go of the offensive line coach?" Do you have any thoughts on that one, Anthony?
No, that's another one I would probably just defer to you. Butch Berry's did wonders last year, right? And obviously this year it's kind of been, we've been a little bit disappointed in Jonah, and we're on right guard, like number 5. There's just, it gets to the point where, there's only so much you can do, right? They're human beings. It's not like he, can control these guys and make them play better. He can only do his job. We've seen him do his job well. I don't tend to think he's doing his job any worse. It's just, this is the product of what you have right now. So, yeah, like I said, I would, Kate, defer to you as far as, do you think he would follow Mike? Do you think he would stick? And maybe, if there's a new head coach, are they bringing their own guy in? right, how much of the staff stays and how much of the staff goes. You know how it is in Miami. You bring one guy, you bring somebody in, but hey, you got to keep this guy employed and that guy employed, right? So who knows?
Yeah, and this is one of those questions that's really tough to answer because we don't know the inside, what's happening inside that building. We don't know, what the relationship is between Butch Berry, Mike McDaniel. We don't know, what some of the decisions have been. I feel like when Butch Berry came to Miami, he kind of had the personality of being a bit of an abrasive coach that, players and coaches didn't necessarily, he's not the warm and fuzzy type guy. And that's another one of those styles that either it hits home really well or it doesn't. I know that Teron Armstead, when he was talking on his podcast, is a big fan of Butch Berry. I don't know whether Mike McDaniel would see him the same way. Because I don't see Butch Berry as being a guy that is going to sit back and not impose his opinion on something, and that may not always match up with Mike McDaniel. And I kind of had the thought, I don't know if it was last night or early this morning, right? And we've talked a lot about Mike McDaniel needing to be able to adjust to the personnel on the field. And one of the questions that has come up in the past is like, who is responsible for the personnel on the field? Like within those position rooms, do those coaches get to decide who is on the field? Like is Eric Studesville deciding which running back goes on the field? Or is the wide receivers coach deciding what receivers are on the field? And as an offensive line coach, right, the Dolphins have had a bunch of injuries along the offensive line. Is it Butch Berry that gets to decide who next man up is? And I have a little more on that, but I saw you wanted to say something, so I'll give you a chance to jump
No,
in.
continue, because I'm going to veer off of that just a little bit, but continue.
Yeah, so just along, like, does Butch Berry get to make those decisions? Because Cole Strange for me was not grading well at all those first several weeks that he was here with the Dolphins. The last couple of weeks he has graded a little bit better, but I think that part of the reason that he graded better, especially against the Falcons, was that the Dolphins went further away from those wide zone schemes that Mike McDaniel is so well known for. And I think that part of that is that they just don't have the personnel up front, both at the guards, specifically Cole Strange. I think Jonah is a little better fit for the wide zone stuff than Cole Strange is, but also with the performances they've had at the tight ends makes it difficult to run that wide zone stuff. So is it Butch Berry that's saying, hey, Cole Strange is the, maybe not the best scheme fit for what we're doing, but he is the, if we're getting the 5 best players on the field, this has to be one of the guys, right? So is there, has there been a little bit of tension there in terms of who they want to put on the field? Because obviously Mike McDaniel, I feel like Keon Smith probably would have been a little more of what he wanted from a guard with the athleticism there. That obviously failed miserably, couldn't keep doing that. But when they started to look for guys to bring off the street, right? It was it Butch Berry saying, look, this is a good player in Cole Strange, might not be the perfect, Shanahan scheme guard, but this guy can play versus going and finding somebody else as a good scheme fit. So that one kind of popped up to me as something that didn't necessarily fit McDaniel's vision, but could be, the offensive line coach being like, hey, these are our 5 best guys. These are the 5 best guys that give us a chance to win, right? I'm going to put them on the field, and you need to figure out how to call plays that are going to work with them. So I don't know where those decisions fall. I wouldn't, in terms of whether or not there's a chance that they let him go, I don't see it happening in season, but I don't know one way or the other. Like I wouldn't say that I'm confident in him returning, and I also wouldn't say that I'm confident in them, not returning. I hope they don't do the Dolphins thing that you were talking about, where they bring in a new head coach and are like, hey, you can be the head coach, but you got to keep Butch Berry, right? Kind of like they did with Mike McDaniel. Like Mike McDaniel came in as the head coach and offensive coordinator, and it felt like they told him that he had to keep Josh Boyer that first year for the defense to try to keep some continuity there. I hope that doesn't happen again.
Same with Danny Crossman.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and real quick, just to kind of piggyback off of that. So I don't know. Again, nothing is fact, And I'm not sure if this would be even universal or if it changes based on room and position coach. If some guys with maybe more tenure, I have no idea, right? It's completely a hypothetical thought. But based on some of the interviews during the season from the linebacker coach and from Anthony Weaver, it gave the impression that the decisions about linebackers and who played and whatnot were based on the linebacker coach, who the name escapes me right now, but for whatever reason, it seemed like the positional coach kind of had a little more say as to who was playing and who was playing where and starting. So again, I don't know if that's 100% true or if I read into it too much or wrong. And then again, even if I am correct about that, in that situation, I don't know if that's something that, again, is universal across the board or if it varies based on position group, and whatnot, because especially on offense, being that it is Mike, I can see Mike just having total control over everything because he's been so stubborn as to change what he wants to do and change, not give up play calling, right? So it seems like he's very, very hands-on, obviously, on that side of on that side of the ball.
Absolutely. All right, so that wraps up the questions that we have in the chat. I don't know if we're gonna keep talking here. If there's anything else that pops up, we'll put it in there. Anthony, is there anything else that you wanted to discuss here before we wrap up this live?
Um, I mean, honestly, I feel like we could just go all day because there's a lot of there's a lot of material that we could cover. But I'll take the easy route out and just say, it's interesting spot. It's an interesting time to be a Dolphins fan with so much up in the air, and we're at the point where we have to be patient, right? Like, it's not all going to get figured out and solved, tomorrow. We have to do, our due diligence, and hopefully, they make the right choice as far as who's going to be the next general manager. And what gives me hope is when you look at the guys that are kind of rumored to be available, or next in line for a GM position, there's some really talented guys that have been a part of some good, consistent organizations. And and they've spent some time there where they're going to be bringing good things, and a good mindset and good, a good IQ, all the things that you do want in your GM to Miami if it ends up being one of those guys. So that's the first thing I think that needs to happen, and then you give that guy the control to say Mike can stay or Mike has to go. Um, Again, I don't think Dolphins need to go scorched earth from a roster perspective, but I do think that we're at the point where I do hope that it's new GM and new head coach, and let the coordinators and everything else trickle down off of that. And with Tua, right, it needs to be, if he's going to be here, that's fine. But again, um, it's time to start preparing for the future and the next, assortment of guys that are hopefully going to get this thing turned around and going in the right direction.
So, all right, before we head out, and you kind of touched on
Oh
this a
boy.
little bit, right? No, you're good. We got the Bills coming up this week before they travel to Spain to play Washington. And you mentioned seeing what this roster looks like as we move forward. I think you and I are both on the same page that we want, basically scorched earth in terms of the front office and starting fresh. So the rest of the season is, in a lot of ways, going to be about seeing how these young guys develop and finding the guys that are going to be part of this roster going forward. And we've already talked about Patrick Paul, Devon Achane, Jalen Waddle being those guys that are scheme versatile that should be around no matter what. So can you give me 3 more guys that we should watch for the rest of the season to see whether or not they can really be building blocks for whatever the next version of the Miami Dolphins look like?
Interesting. Okay, let's go with. I'm going to give you a little bit of a surprise because it's at a position that gets devalued, but I would really like to see a lot more Ollie Gordon because I want and believe in a power run game. And to me, Ollie is the kind of guy that can tote 20 times a game and give you that smash mouth where a tough physical offense look and feel. And again, that's what I want. So I would really like to see Ollie, get more of that opportunity. It's an easy thing to take, Kenneth Grant and Jordan Phillips because, Zach Sealer just signed a contract and, it's one in the trenches. So for me, I'll cheat a little bit and take the 2 rookies because what I would really like to see is, and I'll take a third too, and we'll call it that, my 1, 2, 3, and Chop as well. Right. So, between the 2 rookies and Chop, I would really like to see those guys get the majority of the snaps. I'd like to see them continue to grow and develop and progress. So that way, when we go into 2026, there is a more clear-cut picture that the defensive line is set and Miami can focus elsewhere, more specifically on making sure the offensive line is taken care of if they want to go the quarterback route. But bottom line is I really want the combination of Zach, Kenneth Grant, Jordan Phillips, and Chop to be able to stop the run and rush the passer when need be, because the rest of the defense can fall in line off of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just to kind of speak to this comment that just came in, Anthony, if you go back earlier in the show, we did discuss that topic a little bit about the value of those picks. And to Testino, to your points there, it kind of feels like this team is almost set up to rebuild the way that we've wanted it to be built from the beginning. Like we have solid pieces on the offensive line in Patrick Paul. Jonah is still developing, not somebody we're giving up on, right? You got Aaron Brewer there. So you have 3 guys already that should be part of your future plans. Hopefully James Daniels returns and we can find out what there is there. And then you flip over to the defensive line. And like you said, we got, the Kenneth Grant, the Jordan Phillips, right? Maybe Zeke Biggers can develop into that rotational piece as well. And you have a premium position player in Chop Robinson that's a first round pick. And I just dropped my cup.
Oh boy.
But you have those good young pieces in the trenches that feels like the next whatever that comes in, whether it's head coach, GM, all of that stuff, is getting that foundation of what we wanted the entire time. So it does look like the viewers have jumped up a little bit here. We are going to wrap it up today. But if this is something that you guys like, that you want to see more of, make sure to leave a comment. Find us on Twitter. My handle's on the screen there at OL Coach Smith 63. You can find Anthony on Twitter as well. It's at Tino, TINO 9322. And let's keep talking about the Dolphins. I know the rest of the season may not have the positive stuff that we want to see, but there's still going to be a lot of stuff to talk about in terms of the growth of the players that we're seeing and the new pieces that we'll be looking to add as well. So thanks to everybody for watching, and we will hopefully do this again soon.
Thanks, guys.